everyone, I'm Melanie Smith. I'm the owner of Simply Seamed, and today I'm going to talk to you about cutting your fabric for production work. Now when I say production, I'm talking small scale, maybe 5 to 10 copies of the same item and using the same or different kinds of fabric. This is appropriate for if you have like a small online shop or if you'd like to sell at craft fairs. And it's a little more efficient than cutting each piece and each size individually. We're going to learn today how to kind of plan ahead and cut everything that you need all at once. So what you'll need to begin is, of course, all of your fabrics that you'll be wanting to dig into. Your pattern template, which I showed you how to make one of these in my last video. Rotary cutter and pattern weights. And of course, a nice big table to put everything on with a cutting mat. So after you've already picked your fabrics, and I would highly recommend you layer. You can use multiple fabrics. For example, I'm going to be making my romper in a size 2, 4, and 6. I'm going to make one of each in this fabric and one of each in this fabric. So I'm going to cut them all together. And what you want to do is measure how much you have of each fabric. Now what I like to do after I've purchased my fabric is I wash it right away. And before I put it away, because I don't always use it after I've bought it, I will fold it up. Well, I'll measure it first, then I'll fold it up, and then I'll put a little tag on it with a pin that tells me how many inches of that fabric I have. So this one, for example, tells me I have 111 inches. And then that way I don't have to guess. When I'm ready to use it, I can just grab it and look and say, oh, okay, that's how much I have. Let's plan how many pattern pieces I can cut. So in order to plan, there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can just lay your fabric out onto your table and put your pattern pieces on there and kind of move them around and see how many you can fit. Or what I like to do personally is use an Excel spreadsheet. And what I've done is I've measured all my pattern pieces and measured how much length I need for each one. And then I've set the spreadsheet up so that I can select up to 6 different pattern pieces, and it'll calculate how many total inches I need, and then it'll subtract that from how much fabric I have in the little column where I put in what fabric I want to use and how much of it I have. So it's kind of nice because it tells me whether I'll have enough, how much I'll have left over, or if I'm short, how many inches I'll be short by. So it's a really nice tool. And I'm going to give you a copy of that on my website that you can feel free to download and use for yourself. So we're going to stop here for a quick second, and you'll see just a little video on what it looks like and how you use it. So now that you've figured out exactly which pattern pieces you want to cut and what's going to fit on your fabric, we're ready to start laying it out and cutting. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm using 2 different fabrics for this. So I've already ironed all my fabric, I've folded my fabric in half, and I've laid one on top of the other, as you can see here. Now it's really important that when you fold your fabric in half, you fold it on the grain line. And when you lay them together, you want to be sure that the folds are matched up to each other as exactly as you possibly can. And once you think you've got it all lined up, I would just go ahead and put a few weights down so that things don't start shifting around when you lay out your fabric. What I also like to do is I like to lay my fold line on top of an existing grid line on my mat. That way I know for sure that I'm perfectly straight, and I can also use that as a reference for laying out my fabric when if my fabric has a grain line and I want to be sure that I'm laying it straight, I can measure from a line on my mat to that grain line at 2 different points, and then I know whether or not my grain line's a little off. So now we're ready to start laying out our pattern pieces. And this is a pretty simple pattern, so it shouldn't take very long. One other thing to be sure is that if your fabric is directional, make sure that you've laid your fabrics out in the same direction. You don't want to be laying one this way and one this way, because then when you cut, something that you cut is going to be upside down. Ask me how I know that. So if you have directional fabric, be sure that they're both pointing in the same direction, and be sure that you lay your pattern pieces out in the corresponding direction. Sometimes when you're laying out multiple sizes, you can gain some efficiencies by putting the same pattern pieces together in different sizes. So instead of having my size 2, then my size 4, then my size 6, perhaps if I did the bodice of all sizes together, and then the bottoms of all sizes together, I might be able to fit it in a little better. So you still might have to experiment a little bit with that. I'm actually going to put all my bodices together because these pattern pieces are not very wide, and I'll have some extra fabric here on the side that I can use for something else, like maybe a sun hat, or I can just put it in my scrap pile and use it in a quilt. So you always want to save as much fabric as you can. Another thing you can do is, if you have pattern pieces with a lot of straight lines like what I have here, is I will try to lay them out so that they're going like this. The one straight piece is right up against the other, so that I only have to make that cut one time. Much the same way as when we were actually tracing out our pattern to cut into the template. And I'm just barely out of room here for this last pattern piece, but that's okay. I'll cut what I have here on the table, and then I'll pull all of this up, and then I'll continue to cut the other pieces that I need. You might want to stick to just 4 layers at a time, depending on your rotary cutter. Some can do up to 6. You'll just have to experiment with that and see how your rotary cutter does. Of course, a nice sharp edge helps. One thing I would highly recommend as you're cutting your pieces out is to move them out of the way. And when you move your pieces after they've been cut, looks like this one didn't make it all the way. You really want to try to keep your pattern pieces together with the template, and then just lay one side on top of the other. So here I have the green top, and I'm going to put the green bottom on top of that. And I'm making my size piles with the templates and the fabric still together, so I don't lose track of what I have. So you'll just continue in that fashion, cut out all your pattern pieces, stack them on top of each other, and then you're ready to begin sewing. So thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the lesson and you learned something. I hope that you make good use of that spreadsheet. Join me next time when we'll learn how to sew all of these pattern pieces together in a faster and more efficient way.